Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our Children's Law Center Special Education Pro Bono training. My name is Jen Massey. I'm the Pro Bono Director at Children's Law Center, and I'm going to do a brief introduction before we get started today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Pro Bono program at CLC, our virtual training series, a few notes just about today's training part 2 in particular of this special education series, and then a reference for on-demand resources. Children's Law Center fights so every child in DC can grow up with a loving family, good health, and a quality education. We are serving over 5,000 children and families each year, and we can't do that without the help of our pro bono attorneys. We place cases in the areas of family, health, and education. Of course, we are here today to focus on the special education work that we do. We support our pro bono attorneys. We're screening our cases and the legal issues within them to determine what might be appropriate for a pro bono lawyer who hasn't been practicing in this area of law. We provide training materials, videos, resources, and we have mentors on staff who are experienced in special education. They are there when you take a case on to get initial recommendations for getting started working with your client, and then also to talk throughout the case, discuss strategy, ask questions, and ultimately provide you with support and guidance as you're doing the work. We're here for part of our virtual training series. We're holding these across all of the areas of work that we do, family, health, and education. You'll also see our cultural humility training highlighted here as we're doing a training to talk about what culturally humble representation looks like when doing pro bono cases and serving our clients. Today's training, part 2, again, we are here to talk about handling a special education case. So if you joined us in part 1, we were talking about what is special education. We thought through the legal standards that apply, the steps of going through the process. We covered a lot of material there today, and today we're going to cover working with our clients. We're going to talk about working with your mentor, taking on one of these cases, and ultimately some tips just for the practice and going through the meetings process in these cases. We're handling them remotely. There's a note here about that. The mentoring that we provide can provide guidance on how do you handle this type of case in the pandemic. What does that look like? And so we're doing the work remotely with clients and with schools, and we're happy to provide assistance and guidance about that. If you have questions today, feel free to put them in the chat, send an email. We're happy to answer them and support you along the way. Including that support, those on-demand resources that I referenced, you can find them on our website. If you go to childrenslawcenter.org, you'll see pro bono listed at the bottom. It'll bring you to this page and the various links on the right-hand side so that you can check out resources and, of course, ask questions if you have them. If you're interested in the case, let me know. I'm happy to chat through what might be a good fit and answer any of your questions. In terms of our training today and all of the trainings that we're putting on, we're interested in your feedback. What's working? Where can we improve? Feel free to do the survey. Feel free to send us an email, give us feedback at any time. We're here to support you through this process. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. I'm excited to take us to handling a special education case. You're going to see Janine Tillery is back for part 2, our supervising attorney and a mentor in special education at Children's Law Center, and Dee Dee Davis, who's also a senior education attorney at Children's Law Center. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can move over to Janine's screen and take it from here. Thanks so much, Janine.
No problem. Thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Oops. Okay, so we're going to talk about handling a special education case. And I think what's important to think about is that when our client population, so it might be a little bit different than maybe what you've worked with before as far as working with clients, but our clients are all in the low income population. And so I just want to talk about what that means, because working with clients that are low income, it's not necessarily just about the fact that they make less money or they are living in poverty. It affects pretty much every aspect of their life. And so we're going to talk about like what that means when it comes to taking on one of these cases and working directly with the client that is a low-income client. I want to first start off by talking about legal representation for low-income clients and how important the need is. This is an old, at this point, it's old, but it's still, I think, relevant information just to think about what low-income households or what low-income clients might think when it comes to thinking about legal representation. According to this survey done by the Legal Services Corporation, it says that 1 in 4 low-income households have experienced 6 or more civil problems that year, and only 20% sought legal help. And 86% of civil legal problems reported by low-income people received inadequate or no legal help. So definitely the idea of you all taking a case is phenomenal, because the need is great, the need is there, you know, and with everything going on, it's probably even more so than it was in 2017. So by you taking on a case, it's kind of like you're going to provide a voice for people that might not have one, or may not even know about how to get legal help. And obviously there's various reasons why people don't why clients don't reach out for legal representation, income, maybe the view they might have of what an attorney is and what they might do. They might have a negative view. There's a lot of various reasons why, but as a pro bono attorney, if you take a case, you would really be providing a big, you know, big help for clients. So the other thing you want to think about when you're thinking about representing low-income clients is like, what's going on in their lives? Like the low-income realities. There's a lot of things that are facing, that clients and families that we work with are facing. This slide here was put together before the pandemic started. So these were already issues that were facing our clients: housing issues, violence, finances, health insurance, food insecurity, childcare, disability, immigration, education. All these things can just be, you know, the things that the client is facing. In addition now to the new, I guess, client realities, for all of our reality with the pandemic and everything that brings. So poverty guidelines and public benefits. Families that meet the poverty guidelines can be eligible for public benefits programs such as SNAP, with subsidized housing programs. So if you're working with a low-income family, a lot of our clients do receive public benefits, but I think it's important to realize that it's not just like it doesn't solve all their problems. First of all, the certification or recertification processes can be very complex and difficult to navigate. It may not cover the cost of raising and feeding a family. And subsidized housing is often unsanitary, unsafe, unstable. So there's a lot of things that just because a person gets public benefits, it doesn't mean that that brings them up to the level of maybe a middle-class family or higher income family. There's still a lot of struggle even when they have those types of benefits. So another low-income reality: 1 out of 3 people making less than $20,000 a year, so they experience a great deal of stress in the previous month. So it's just something to think about. Overall, you want to keep in mind that when you're representing a client, that there's likely something else going on. They may not have the safety net that higher income people might have. There's a lot of different stressors that they're facing at one time. And as we get into the presentation a little bit more, you'll see why that's important to keep that in mind and why we want you to know this information when you're taking on a case. So we're going to talk a little bit about scarcity. I don't know if you may have heard of the book. There's a book called, this is where this information is coming from, Scarcity. It's a book called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. And it's by Eldar Shafir and Senhil Mullainathan. One person is a behavior economist and one is a psychologist. And they wrote this book, and it's really all about scarcity and the mindset, what happens when you're facing scarcity. And scarcity, we'll talk about a little bit more about the definition, but basically it's not having enough or thinking that you're not having enough. and not believing that you're not having enough, having a taxing effect on your decision-making abilities, interfering with your decision-making abilities and your cognitive abilities. And so everyone experiences scarcity at some point. And you want to think about like what happens to our minds when we feel we have too little. You know, what happens? How can scarcity impact our choices and priorities? And when you think about when I drafted this was before the pandemic started, and I think it was really hard for people when I did the presentation to wrap their minds around. Some people it was hard to wrap their minds around, like, what does that mean? Like, what does scarcity mean? What is it like to have too little? Some people, I remember there was a person that like raised their hand and was like, I've never been in a position where I didn't have enough money. I've never been in a position where I didn't feel like I had enough. But I think the pandemic has humbled us all, because now we've all, I think, experienced like what happens when you went to the what happened when you went to the grocery store and there was no paper towel, or there were no toilet paper, or there was no Lysol. What do you start thinking about? Searching around different stores, like, you know, what became your focus, and how did that impact your choices? And then like think about like what behaviors may be exhibited due to scarcity. There's a lot of different behaviors that might come to mind, or different things that might happen when you start feeling, you know, that you don't have enough. And that's the mindset that a lot of our clients are in on a daily basis, not just because there's a pandemic, but there's other issues that are coming into play. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough mental bandwidth. That's the little brain there. And they don't have enough time. And these are all things that impact how decisions are made, and behavior, and why a client does the things that they do, because if they're in poverty, they can't take a break from, if they're in poverty, they really don't really get to have a break from the scarcity in some way, shape, or form. And so these are all things that are maybe going through their mind at one time. When am I going to get more money? I have, you know, my kids, and one of them has a broken wheelchair, and I have to go to work. I don't have enough time to do all these different things. Which can create a lot of frustration and stress. So this kind of talks about like the side effects of scarcity. It depletes, like I said, decision-making and cognitive abilities, creates a sense of urgency. You know, you might be like, I'm really in a hurry because like I have other things to do. Creates tunneling, which is a term that was in the book I just talked about, the scarcity book. They talk about tunneling, just sacrificing to prioritize most urgent needs while neglecting other important needs. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm tunneling because I need to get groceries. So I'm neglecting other things. I'm neglecting the fact that I don't have money for rent. Rent is going to be neglected. I need to eat today. That's the thing that's most important to me. So that's an example of tunneling. Focusing on the here and now, focusing on the immediate priorities here and now, and maybe neglecting other things. And when I say neglecting other things, like it's other important things that also need probably the attention, your attention. And so that's tunneling, and that's something also that we see our clients. For example, I had a client that she needed to be in court. We had a court hearing that for something that was like she missed she missed turning something in that she needed to turn in. So we had to have a hearing about it, and she could not make the hearing. And I was like, you got to make the hearing, you need to be there. The reason that she couldn't make it was because her son had a broken wheelchair and was unable to leave the house. And so it was like she had to just stay with him or go to court. The choice she made was to stay with the child because she couldn't get out of the house. So focusing on what's the most important, even though court was also important, it wasn't that she didn't care, that she didn't have a way to do both things at once. So here's some scarcity mindset emotions, just the thing like I've already talked about a little bit. Feeling afraid, feeling frustrated, feeling anger. Your client might come to you with any of these emotions, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're mad at you or they're frustrated at you or they're angry at you. It just might mean that they're mad at the situation. They're mad at what's going on. They're fearful of what's going on. They don't know, if they have enough or if they will have enough. Or they're just frustrated that they're in the situation that they're in. They might be frustrated with the school because they don't know if the child will have enough, or any type of thing that might come from scarcity and feeling like they don't have enough. So example of scarcity experiences, I've already kind of touched upon those, which is why I have the toilet paper here. And I want you to just think about when it comes to scarcity, how does that impact your mindset? Did you ever feel like when you went to the grocery store and everything on the news everything on the news says, oh, you know, they're running out of this, they're running out of that. Did it impact your mindset? Was that the focal point of your day? Or someone in your household, were they like, oh my gosh, we need to go and get, you know, tons of all the bleach we can or all the hand sanitizer? And then how did you manage that? If you're not a person that's living in poverty, that might be a thing that you're able to manage it. You were able to order it offline. It's not a big deal. Or you have enough, or you have family members, you have other people. But when it comes to our clients, they may not have the safety net to be able to manage, and it might be it's likely more than just one thing. It may not just be, you know, oh, the pandemic. It could be their son was killed yesterday. It could be they don't have enough food. It could be they owe $10,000 in rent that they would pay, but the apartment is so awful that they, you know, they don't feel like they should pay, but they know and now there's so much that they owe that they can't pay. It could be a lot of different things that make it difficult to manage all these different areas of scarcity at one time. This is a quote from the book, which I think is really important. It says, "We are emphatically not saying that poor people have less bandwidth, quite the opposite. We are saying that all people, if they were poor, would have less effective bandwidth." And that's a quote from the book Scarcity, Why Having Too Little Means So Much. So it's kind of like saying, hey, anyone who had to deal with a whole bunch of things at once would struggle and have less bandwidth. So group exercise, I'm just going to talk through a couple of these just to give you an idea. Imagine you have a client who scheduled a meeting with your, imagine you have scheduled a meeting with your new client, Ms. Roberts, to be held at your law firm's office. She does not show up for the meeting and you cannot reach her by phone. How do you feel, or how might you feel when the client doesn't show? Would you think maybe she's just like, you know, abusing your time by not showing up? Would you feel like, you know, she's not interested, she's not serious about getting help? What are the possible reasons your client couldn't make the meeting? There could be a lot of different reasons the client couldn't. They could be not have transportation. They could have, depending on how you notified them of it, if you sent them something in writing and their literacy level is not that, you know, at a level where they can just kind of read fluently, that they might not have understood what time it was or what day it was. It could be childcare. They couldn't get someone to take care of their child. It could be they couldn't get off their job. It could be that they, could be a lot of different reasons, but the whole point of this exercise is that you don't want to jump to the conclusion that it's like, they just didn't show, or, you know, they're not interested. You might want to dig a little further to see like how that happened and what could you do differently so that, you know, it doesn't happen again. Could you call them the day before? Could you, you know, confirm that they had that meeting was going to happen? You might just want to check and see, like, is there a better time that works for them? So you don't want to just assume that at that point they're not interested and just close the case out. You want to see if there's something else that, or try again in a different way. Can we meet somewhere else? Should we meet at the library? Should we do it by phone? Is there any other way that we can talk besides you coming to my law office? And try to kind of meet them where they're at. Granted, we have clients that sometimes it's not the right time for them to have to receive legal services, to get legal services, and that's fine. But you just want to make sure that you are going a little, like, not just assuming that it's just because if they didn't get back to you, they didn't make the meeting, that it's just because they didn't want to be there or they just were rude. So implications, clients' interactions, barriers to communication via phone or face. So this might be like an example of reasons. Inflexible job, can't get off work, transportation costs, the cost of going from, you know, one side of town to the other might be expensive. Time commitment for using public transportation. And I want to say here also that even though it may seem inexpensive, for our client population that when they're living in poverty, even a little bit, even if it's $5 or $10, could be a lot of money out of their budget. You know, an Uber ride might not be in their budget. A bus ride might not be in their budget. So I just want to think it's not necessarily that, like, it's only $5 or $10, whatever. It could be very expensive for them, and that money might be needed to be used for something else. Caring for an infant or other relative, or cost of cell phone minutes. They might not be able to sit on a long phone call if their minutes are limited. And they also may not, sometimes their phone may not be working because of limited minutes, or there's a financial issue that they're unable to pay their phone bill for a period of time. So group exercise 2, client interaction. Imagine you have an IEP scheduled tomorrow. You call your client, Mr. Reed, to prepare for the IEP meeting. You called Mr. Reed several times. When he finally answers, his words sound slurred, and he is speaking slowly. He says he didn't hear the phone ring because he was sleeping. How do you feel when you finally get him on the phone? Are you irritated, a little bit irritated, just wondering like what's going on? Are you wondering like why is he answering the phone and sounding like he's slurred, his words are slurred? What are the possible reasons for the client's behavior? This is an example of a previous client that I had who was struggling with a lot of mental health needs that she didn't have at the beginning when I first started representing her, that she had towards the end. And so she went from being a very like organized, on top of it person to a person who was like in a day treatment program and had like some struggling with mental health, struggling with like working with the school and her children and her household, her rent, and she was also on medication. So she was constantly getting it adjusted, which is what was kind of causing her to like sound like she was under the influence because of the medication that she was on. But it wasn't just that like she wasn't interested, or that like she was just under the influence of alcohol and not really interested, you know, not just making an effort. There were other reasons that were involved, and she was also really depressed. So what would be the next steps? You will want to like see if there's another time that they would, you know, could they, is there another time that we could talk? Could you talk, if the meeting is tomorrow, can you meet before the meeting to discuss? Do they need, are they going to be able to make the meeting in person? Are they going to be there by phone? You know, is there just another time to talk? If you were having an IEP meeting and you knew about it ahead of time, don't wait till the day before to call the client. You might, if you know you have a meeting, you might want to try to call 4 days out and then maybe 2 days out to talk about like, hey, we have that, you know, you might want, if you have a Friday meeting, you might want to call the Friday before and like, you know, we have that meeting next Friday, and then call them again on Tuesday or Wednesday to kind of remind them or talk to them about, don't forget we have the meeting on Friday, or call the day before after you've done a couple calls before that. And you may not need to do that, but you might need to do that, or maybe write something, give something in writing, or say, remember, you know, just thinking differently about how you would engage with this particular client in order to move forward with the representation. Other issues that may be impacting clients: your client may have not graduated from high school, they may have basic literacy skills, they may they may not have been provided the information they need to advocate to the children. Keep in mind that when, for example, the special education cases, the schools don't provide the parents with the law, or really, I mean, they provide them with like a packet of information that's like about their rights, but there's no like know your rights parent conference where they know they're learning about IDEA and all of the details. The school's not providing them with that kind of information, so they may not even know what they advocate for their children. Your client may have other such as responsibilities for extended family members, neighbors. They may have to rely on public transportation. They may not be safe in their home. Let's see this other slide. They may also be struggling with their own mental health issues or own physical health issues that may interfere as well. Clients may come to you frustrated and confused, frustrated with the school, sometimes with the child or with themselves. They may not understand everything that's happening to the child, and they may be overwhelmed by other stressors, and kind of just be dealing with a lot of different things at one time. So I'm going to turn it over to Dee Dee. Let me stop sharing my screen. To talk to you more about handling a special education case.
Thank you, Janine. We are in transition. I want to thank everybody again for joining us. Dee Dee, I can see your screen. I'm not hearing audio. And so again, thanks everybody for bearing with us.
Okay, how about, is this better?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
All right.
Yes, okay, handing it over to you, Dee Dee. Thanks.
Technology, great. Okay, so you can see me and hear me, excellent. Okay, so we're gonna just continue along where Janine left off with some best ways to represent our clients and kind of how you guys can work together the best and the most efficient way. And they're pretty straightforward. The easiest is, you know, make sure they know how to contact you. Make sure that you know how to contact them. Oh, sorry, I went ahead. This can be, I mean, email, that's usually what we use, but that might not be what's best for our clients. They might not have ready access to smartphones, or they might not check their email as regularly as us, so they might prefer a phone call. Make sure you have the most updated address for them, and make sure to remind them that to let you know if that changes, because our clients are a little bit more transient than what we're used to, and so if you're sending documents to them and it's an old address, they might never actually get it. So sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit here, but one main tip is our clients' cell phones are often the prepay version. They're not kind of the contract ones that we're used to. And so at the end of the month, they might not have any minutes left, and it might be really difficult to contact them. So if you don't hear from them for the last week or so of the month, just try again at the beginning of the month, because it might be as simple as they can't get your messages, or they might get them, but they can't reach out to you unless they're on Wi-Fi. Just as always, as things change, make sure that they know to keep you up to date. And this last point here about a family member or friend, that's helpful if phone numbers change. So with those phone numbers that are, you know, prepay, sometimes, you know, if one runs out, they pick up another cell phone, and they might not think you're not the most important person on their mind to contact. Sorry, guys. But they might let someone else know, like if it's a sibling or a relative or a neighbor, then you can know to reach out to that person to get the updated contact information. As Janine mentioned, sometimes our clients might have lower literacy levels, or they might not have gone very far in their own education. So make sure the language you're sending is not legalese. It's not the language we would be sending to each other, or that you would write in typical legal documents. So it's make sure that it's something that your client can understand, and make sure as you're going over things with them that you're checking in to make sure that they did understand. One way I like to do this is to ask them to tell me back what I told them. You know, instead of just saying, did you understand? Because they might be a little embarrassed, or, you know, not want to admit that they didn't understand what you said. But if you ask them to explain it back to you, then you can actually tell for yourself if they understood. And this last one is just make sure anything that you send to them in writing you have reviewed with them, kind of for the same reasons we just talked about. 8th grade level is a good measure. A lot of our clients honestly might be below the 8th grade level too. So if you aim for the 8th grade, make sure it's something that you can still repeat, they can repeat back to you, and that you can explain to them. Okay, so when you start working with your client, they have to sign a retainer and a release. So this should be at your initial meeting. If you send it to them ahead of time, like we said, they might not understand it, they might not get it, they might not read it. So we want you to just do that when you're with them. Obviously, this looks a little bit different now, right? So if you want to email it to them while you're talking, or if you do have to mail it to them in advance because you want to be able to review it together over video or over the phone, just tell them, you know, I'm going to send you something, but don't open it, don't worry about it, don't look at it until I call you. We'll talk about it then, we'll go over it together, just so they're kind of reassured. Yep, make sure you go over what it means to work with a lawyer. You might be the first lawyer they've ever met. You might be the 5th lawyer they've ever met. You have no idea, but just kind of explain what a lawyer is, and especially confidentiality, that they're in charge. Like, they're the client, they reached out for support, they want help for their child. So you're there to work for them. And that can be a new concept for some of our clients that we work with, that they're in charge and they're directing the representation. So they're the ones that are choosing the goals. What do they want to do right away? Like, what is the most important thing to the client? And what is their long-term goal? Like, what do they want to see at the end of the representation? And make sure you do reinforce the importance of staying in contact. If they don't stay in contact with you, you can't help them. So that's a good way to reinforce it. Like, if you don't hear from them for months, then nothing's happening on the case for months, because once again, they are in charge. So you can't just be doing work when you don't hear from them. And that's often not the case in lots of other relationships they have. So that's a good way to frame it to them. Right, we talked about no using legalese, who they want to communicate with. I mean, if some of our clients have fairly, I don't want to say fairly good, because they're calling us for a reason, but they have collegial relationships with their school, or they're in touch with at least certain people at the school, whether it's the teacher or it's like the special ed coordinator, or even if the receptionist at the school. There's usually someone they get along with or they talk with at the school, and you want to know who's going to be in charge of reaching out to schedule things at the school, who's going to be in charge of sending follow-up information to the school. We do have some clients that are very involved and very aware and of their rights, and they've already been, you know, advocating with the school for years. So maybe they just want to continue what they're doing with you giving them advice to figure out how that's going to work and what the best way is. Okay, yeah, if you want to know something that's happening on the case, make sure you tell them to let you know. Because sometimes our clients don't want to bother us, right? They think that, you know, we're lawyers, we're really busy, you know, we have a lot going on. And so they'll get a phone call from the school or they'll get a letter, and they don't want to bother us. They don't want to give us the information because, you know, they didn't think it was that important, and, you know, we have a lot going on. And then you turn out it was like a really important document, or it's a phone call that you really needed to know about. So just ahead of time, make sure you let them know what you want to be contacted for, and it's definitely before they sign anything. So even if this is overdone, if they start calling you about field trip forms or something, then you can let them know. But before they sign anything, you want them to call you. All right, and so this is kind of the mentor-mentee relationship. So you'll be, I'm sure Jen will go over it, or if she didn't already, is like you'll be matched with a mentor from CLC. Jenny and I do mentoring, and so you'll get to work with an attorney at CLC who has experience with special education. So we're always here to support you. Yep, so definitely reach out to us with your questions. If your client calls you and has a question and you don't know the answer, you can look in our materials. They're available on the website. And you can also email us or reach out with your questions. Like you guys, we also have a lot of cases and are pretty busy. So last minute questions aren't very useful. They're not very helpful. We can't provide the information that you might need. We might be able to just give you some quick advice, but the more time we have, the more we can help you. So if there's, I mean, obviously things come up last minute if you just found out from your client that there's a meeting, but as soon as you guys know, it's easier to email your mentor and be like, oh, there's a meeting in a couple weeks. What's a good time in the next several weeks to meet? And then you guys can figure out what a good time is. Yep, like I said, our resources are all on the website, or you can always reach out to Jen if you can't find something that you need. Be confident in your abilities, for sure. I mean, even if you haven't done special education law before or worked in education at all, I mean, everyone went to school. Everyone has a general idea about education. If you want to just help our clients and work with their kids, that's all we really need. Excuse me. And so you don't have to necessarily be familiar with this area of law to make a big impact on our clients' lives. Same thing with the school, right? I mean, if it doesn't sound right to you or you're confused, your client is probably confused too. So if you're in a meeting and they're using a lot of acronyms or they're saying a lot of, procedural things that don't make sense, don't be afraid to let them know that that doesn't make sense or that you want clarification. I mean, that's their job to explain it to you. Well, it's their job to explain it to the parent, and you're the advocate for the parent. You want to encourage your client to direct the representation and be involved. There shouldn't really ever be a point where you're the one solely deciding what the next steps are, or you're deciding what approach you should take or what the goals are. It should always be directed by our clients with us to support them. As Janine talked about with scarcity, there's a lot of things our clients are juggling. And so although they do care very much about their clients' education, it just might not always be the first thing in their mind all the time. And definitely you can make a difference. We've seen a lot of success stories from our pro bono cases, and our families are always really grateful for our support. Okay, IEP meetings. So to prepare for the IEP meetings, request your records. These are a little bit more challenging right now because schools are closed, but they still have access to the records in their databases, and so you can still request them and you can still get them. You want to make sure the more records you have, the more you know. A lot of our clients' kids have changed schools multiple times, so they might not just have all the records at the current school they're at, so you want to request them from all the schools they've been at. And so we outlined the law for you here of why you're entitled to them and how long you have to get them. So if there's going to be an IEP meeting, they're supposed to give you all the records that they're going to talk about at the meeting 5 days ahead of time. And so that's a good time. If you know there's a meeting and you want help with from your mentor, notify your mentor about the meeting and let them know what day you're anticipating the documents so that they can be prepared to review the documents if you want help with that, if that's something that you think you'll need help with. Okay, so one thing with the records, even though this is the law, it's not regularly followed, unfortunately. So talk with your client in advance about which records you really need. Like if we don't get this certain record, we don't want to go forward with the meeting, because you do have recourse, but that is really to reschedule the meeting and push it further along, which can delay things for your client. All right, evaluations are some of the records you'll get. Those are pretty important. Usually psychoeducational evaluations. They say, what are the diagnoses that the child has, and they recommend some supports the child may need. You can always get those. If it's a younger child, they may only have one. For older kids, there might be several in the file that you can compare and kind of see if things have changed or if you agree with things that have changed. And so the IEP should be based on more or less these evaluations and how the kid is doing in school. And so when you look at the IEPs before the meeting, these are some things you can compare and look at the IEPs. And I think we have IEP, like example IEPs in our materials too. Okay, before the meeting, depending on what the meeting is about, think about who would help you at that meeting. If it's an eligibility meeting and you think the child qualifies for services, you might want to invite someone that can help you make that case. So whether that's an evaluator, a psychologist, an educational expert. If it's a case that the kid's already been eligible maybe, and you're really fighting about what classroom they should be in, what placement, what services they should get, and you've kind of hit a stalemate with the school, you might want to bring someone with you to take notes. You can take notes while you're at the meeting, but it's kind of difficult sometimes to advocate and work with your client and make sure they understand and take notes. So someone else there just to type notes so you have them can be really helpful. If the child has some outside providers, especially if there's behavior issues on the case, this can be really helpful because the schools can either overestimate or underestimate the behaviors sometimes depending on what the meeting is for. So if they have an outside, therapist or community support worker or someone they work with in the community, that person can be really helpful to talk about either successful strategies that have worked or some behaviors that they're concerned about. Prepare your client. This is definitely important. So going into the meeting, you might think that you have one goal for the meeting, like you really want to get speech services added to the IEP, or you really want to address some inappropriate discipline, but your client is really worried about something else. So you want to make sure that you talk with your client ahead of time about what is their goal for the meeting. Like what is the most important thing for them to be addressed? Definitely review any documents that are going to be discussed. Who's going to talk about what? So we want to let our clients talk if they want to speak. However, we want to make it as an effective meeting as possible. So if it helps to prepare with your client, if you want them to practice what they're going to say, or if you just want to kind of help them prioritize what they want to say, that can be helpful as well. A lot of times the issues, I don't say a lot of times, sometimes the issues that our clients are most concerned about can be easily addressed. Like if someone was like, there's a staff member that's said inappropriate things to their child, or there's, they have concerns about safety at release time or something. Those can block them from participating in more substantive conversations, like about evaluations or the IEP at the meeting. So if you can address right at the beginning that your client has a concern about so-and-so teacher saying inappropriate things, to their child, you can address that in the first 5 minutes, and then your client can focus on the IEP part of the meeting. So work with them in advance on what is the most important thing to them and what do they want to make sure they get covered. Because a lot of times these meetings are time limited. Schools often only set an hour for the entire IEP meeting. So you kind of have to prioritize in advance, like make a list of what you want to make sure gets covered. Transportation logistics, well, right now that might not be an issue for a while, but it will be eventually. Right now it's more like technology logistics, as you can see, can be a challenge. So whether or not, like what platform the school is using, whether your client has that platform, whether there's one that they prefer, or whether they prefer to call in, or whether you need to call in and then like add in your client on your phone, figure out how that's going to work. Advocacy style can be a big one. So all different attorneys have different advocacy styles, and different clients have different, personalities or styles they prefer. I mean, if they want kind of like a bulldog attorney to go in and just demand everything of the school, you need to know that in advance, like what's their expectation? Or do they not want to offend anyone at the school? Maybe they have other siblings at the school, or maybe they really like this school, they just wish they did more, and they think that they're doing okay, and they really like them, but you're trying to be like, no, they're not doing what they need to do. This, they really need to do this. So kind of ahead of time, talk about how much they want you to push on the school and what the style should be. All right. Do's and don'ts during the meeting. We definitely want the school's perspective. You definitely want to not interrupt them unless it's inappropriate, obviously, and hear what they have to say. Make sure you know who's in the meeting. More times than I'd like to admit, my notes are like woman in the green sweater, guy in the blue jacket or something, because people come in during meetings, or people, join in on the phone calls and you're not sure who is who. And then later your notes are kind of a mess. So don't be afraid to be like, oh, excuse me, just hold on one moment. Can you please introduce yourself, sir, or something, and make sure you know who is there. If your client, you can tell that they don't really understand, or they're getting frustrated, or there's just been a whole lot of information that probably one person should never be able to, have to comprehend in an hour. Don't be afraid to ask for a break if you want to explain things to your client, or you want to hear what they're, what they're thinking about. Like, yeah, I already covered a little bit about this. Make sure that you're asking questions if you don't understand, if your client doesn't understand. Don't sign anything without reading it. Don't let your client sign anything. Anything they give you to sign doesn't have to be done that day. You can say, well, we'll take this home, or we'll meet afterwards, and I'll fax it back to you, or I'll email it back to you so they have it. If you disagree with what happened at the meeting, make sure it's in writing. Make sure that someone is noting that you disagreed. Otherwise, you're just going to walk away. They're going to finalize an IEP, and it's going to say things you disagreed with. Obviously, we can challenge that later, but it's much easier if your disagreement's on the record. And then after the meeting, check in with your client. How did they think it went? Did you meet the goals that you guys set ahead of time? Sometimes like new things are thrown out at the meeting that no one anticipated, and so kind of figure out what your next steps are going to be based on what came up at the meeting. Did they feel like they were heard? This is important because our clients are directing our representation. And was it something like, did they want to speak more? Was there certain topics they wanted covered that weren't covered? And, how are we going to address that? Do we need another meeting? Are you going to follow up by email, or what are we going to do to address that? Pros and cons of litigation. I guess that's always something you're continually discussing as the case goes on. We want to make sure our clients don't have unrealistic expectations about what they can get out of litigation or what is appropriate to litigate. But we also want to, throughout our case, as attorneys, make sure we're getting all of the evidence we need in case we do need to litigate, and we're making the record that we need so we can use it during litigation. Definitely follow up after the meeting. So in a letter or an email, just kind of saying, I would always ask for the school's notes, but sometimes you're going to have a 2-hour meeting and you're going to get like 4 sentences of notes. So you can send all of your notes, or you can just take the main points. I tend to just send, main point follow-ups and kind of keep my notes in case I want them later. But definitely points of contention, memorialize what the school agreed to, and if there was any timelines you set, what those timelines were. And this is important. Definitely include that you ask that this letter be made a part of the kid's special education records. You don't want to just file in someone's email and be deleted later. You want to ask that it be included in their records. Yeah, we definitely have examples online, and that's something, if after you draft the letter, if you want your mentor to take a look at it, that's something you can give them a heads up and ask for assistance with. Yeah, the benefits is definitely clarify issues, and you can use it later. Jen, are you going to do next steps, or do you want me to go over?
I can take it from here. Thank you so much, Dee Dee. Thanks everyone for joining us for part 2. So what's next? Part 3. This is a 3-part series for our special education training. Part 3 is on the due process hearing. So if your case is going to litigate, it's going to be an administrative hearing, a due process hearing. We're thinking about how we're making our records, how we're making plans for the cases if they do litigate. Most of them are not litigating, but that is something that we want to be mindful of in handling a special education case. So Janie is going to be back for round 3, and we'll talk through the due process hearing, but also is going to include in part 3 considerations about the pandemic. So of course that's having a major impact on how we're handling these cases. And so we're going to talk through some of the special considerations in that regard. I want to just briefly say thank you again for joining us. Alyssa, our pro bono and intake assistant, will be putting a training evaluation in the chat so that you can click on that and give us some feedback. We'll send you a follow-up email as well. And I just want to note we're having trainings on demand. You might be watching this one on demand, so feel free to email if there's questions or feedback. And just noting that we have an overlap of our cultural humility training that's going to touch on and kind of extend upon some of the conversation that we had today in this section when thinking about working with our clients and what that means, and being really mindful about providing client-centered advocacy. So thanks again for part 3. I'm going to go ahead and end our recording. Thank you again so much for joining us.